Hi everyone, this is our economics video presentation. My name is Hong Jiazi from the Department of College of Innovation, and I will present topic number 1. And then my teammate Zhang Lingjin from the Department of English Literature will present topic number 2. And my last teammate Wu Wanshan from the Department of French Literature will present topic number 3. Let's start with the first topic. Which is the tariff impacts between the United States and Taiwan trade under the Trumponomics or Trump administration. First of all, we have to understand what a tariff is. A tariff is basically a tax that the government puts on an imported good, which raises its price, making this foreign good more expensive than it would be compared to if it were to be under the free trade. So why would government place a tariff? Well, the objective of placing these tariffs is to protect domestic producers from foreign competition. And then the government can generate tax revenue for them, and then tariff is also sometimes used as a bargaining tool in trade negotiations. So, what is a reciprocal tariff in the context of the US and Taiwan trade? A reciprocal tariff basically refers to the response to another country's tariff by placing a corresponding tariff. When the US raises tariffs on selected Taiwanese products like semiconductors or electronic components, Taiwan might consider counter tariffs on US imported goods like agricultural products or machinery. A hypothetical example would be when the US imposes a 25% tariff on imported Taiwanese semiconductors and 10% tariff on Taiwanese industrial machinery, and in response, Taiwan imposes a 20% reciprocal tariff on US agricultural exports such as soybeans and corn. So the logic behind Taiwan's reciprocal tariff is to share the pain and pressure so that the US can roll back their tariffs by targeting their politically sensitive sectors like farming and agricultural sectors. However, we have to note that in reality, Taiwan has not imposed a formal reciprocal tariff on the US, largely because these two countries are strategic economic partners, and Taiwan avoids any actions that could escalate any political tensions. Okay, next I'm going to compare the differences between tariffs and quota. So a quota is a government imposed limit on the quantity of a specific good that can be imported or exported during a set amount of time. So while tariff is a tax on each imported good, quota is a physical limit on the quantity of imports. In tariffs, the import quantity will adjust according to how firms and consumers react to the higher price. While in quota, once the quota has been reached, no more legal imports will be accepted. And lastly, in tariffs, the government will be the party who receives the tax revenue, while in quota, the profit is largely gained by whoever owns the import license. So it doesn't have to necessarily be the government. So when might a country prefer to impose a quota over tariff? A country might choose a quota if it cares more about fixing the quantity of imports that yeah, when the country cares more about fixing the quantity of imports rather than collecting tax revenue. For example, if the government wants to guarantee that domestic farmers keep at least 80% of the market, it can cap foreign imports at 20% through a quota. Quotas are also attractive when world prices fluctuate strongly because they provide a clear upper limit on imports regardless of how cheap foreign goods become. Okay, from an efficiency perspective, both instruments create deadweight loss because they raise price and reduce trade. But quotas often perform worse in practice because they invite lobbying and corruption. And in terms of government revenue, tariffs will result in the government gaining the most tax revenue because all the extra money that customers pay on an imported good will go straight to the government. With quotas, the money often turns into extra profit for whoever owns the licenses instead of for funding public services. Okay, let's move on to the graphical analysis of how the US import market reacts to a reciprocal tariff. This is a graph of the US import market. On the y-axis is the price of cacao beans in the US market, and on the x-axis is the quantity of cacao beans in tons. Originally, under free trade, before a tariff was imposed, the US market sells cacao beans at a world price which was $2,500 per ton, and the quantity demanded was 200 and the quantity supplied domestically was 150. This left the room for imports, and the quantity of cacao beans imported before tariff was 50 tons. And after a tariff was imposed, the price of the cacao bean per ton increased by $300, which is now $2,800. And now the quantity demanded decreased to 182 tons, and the quantity supplied domestically increased to 162 tons. This leaves a decreasing room for imports. So under tariffs, the imported cacao beans went from 50 tons to only 20 tons. Now let's go to the second graphical analysis, which shows the relationship between US reciprocal tariffs and Taiwan's exporters. So this is a supply and demand graph for Taiwan's export market to the US. The y-axis shows the price received by Taiwan's exporters, and the x-axis shows the quantity of Taiwan's exports to the US. Before a tariff was imposed, the equilibrium is shown on E0, and the quantity is Q0 and the price is P0. And after a tariff was imposed, the US demand shifts leftward because for every unit of goods imported from Taiwan, US buyers must pay extra tax, making US buyers less willing to import. Because of this shift on the demand curve, a new equilibrium will be created. Now the equilibrium is E1 and the equilibrium quantity becomes Q1 and the equilibrium price is P1. So how does this shift affect Taiwanese exporters? So obviously, the revenue for Taiwanese exporters will fall. The logic behind this is P1 is smaller than P0 and Q1 is smaller than Q0. Before tariff was imposed, the total revenue was Q0 times P0, and after the tariff, the total revenue is Q1 times P1. Therefore, the revenue after the tariff will be smaller than before the tariff was imposed. The second major impact would be the decrease in producer surplus. Before tariff was imposed, the producer surplus was area A plus area B, and after a tariff, producer surplus is only area B. This constriction in producer surplus will eventually lead to production and employee cut, and then also delay or even cancellation in investment and expansion. Okay, what are the impacts of the US tariffs on Taiwanese consumers, producers, and government? So the producers will experience the biggest negative impact because Taiwanese exporters will receive a lower effective price and then the quantity exported will decrease, which eventually leads to revenue and profits drop. And in the long run, this will result in production and employee cuts, and also loss of competitiveness in the global market. For the Taiwanese consumers, they will experience small positive effects, however, it's almost negligible. These effects are slightly lower domestic prices for exportable goods and higher consumer surplus. However, they will also suffer from indirect losses such as weaker job market and slower national economic growth. For the government, they will also experience negative impacts. The government will experience loss of tax revenue due to reduced exports, and there will be increased need for subsidies that they have to fulfill. However, they can also collect some tariff revenue from retaliatory tariffs, but at the cost of higher prices paid by Taiwanese consumers. Okay, how does the export decline influence Taiwan's overall economic welfare? Because exports are a major component of Taiwan's GDP, a decline in export will lead to lower GDP and national income, lower producer surplus, debt weight loss, because the nature of tariff destroys mutually beneficial trade between the US and Taiwan, and also reduce investment and innovation because lower profits means less money spent on research and development, and then slower technological advancement and weaker global competitiveness. In conclusion, export decline will cause a significant reduction in Taiwan's overall economic welfare. Okay, how will reciprocal tariff impact US consumers, producers, and the government? So the producers will suffer the biggest negative impact because first, they will experience lower exports, which leads to lower revenue. They will also lose market share to competitors like the EU, Japan, or South Korea. They will also experience excess domestic supply, cuts in employee and production rates. The consumers, on the other hand, will experience small indirect losses because they don't experience direct tariff impacts. However, they have to pay slightly higher prices for goods imported from Taiwan and also slightly higher domestic prices. And the government, they will not receive any tariff revenue. They will receive lower tax revenue in general because of reduced exports. And they will receive increased political pressure from harmed sectors such as farmers and manufacturers. How does this reciprocal tariff impact US overall net economic welfare? So Taiwan's reciprocal tariff reduces US exports and lowers producers' surplus while generating no tariff revenue for the states. Because both the government and exporters lose income, and because the tariff eliminates mutually beneficial trades, this results in the debt weight loss, and the US experiences a pure net welfare loss. Okay, next I'm gonna hand the presentation over to my next teammate, Zhang Lingzhen.
Hi everyone, this is our economics video presentation. My name is Zhang Lingzhen from the English department, and I will present topic number 2, TSMC as a dominant producer in the advanced chip market. So let's begin. First, let's talk about how TSMC decides price and output. In the advanced semiconductor market, TSMC has strong monopoly power because very few firms in the world can produce cutting-edge chips. Because of this, TSMC is not a price taker. Instead, it chooses both its output level and the price. A monopolist always maximizes profit where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. On a graph, the point where the MR curve intersects the MC curve determines the profit maximizing quantity, which is labeled as M in this graph. Once that quantity is found, the monopoly price is determined by going straight up from M to the demand curve point F, and the price is labeled A. This price is always higher than marginal cost, which shows that TSMC has strong market power and can charge high prices for advanced chips. At the monopoly output M, the monopoly price A is compared with the average total cost at the same quantity. If the monopoly price is above the ATC curve, the firm earns economic profit, not just accounting profit. The size of the profit equals price minus average total cost times quantity, which is A minus B times M. On the graph, this profit is represented by the blue rectangle. Under perfect competition, production will occur where demand equals marginal cost. This produces a higher output level and a lower market price. This outcome maximizes total social welfare. However, under monopoly, TSMC restricts output from Q down to M and raises the price. Because of this output restriction, some consumers who are willing to pay more than the cost of production no longer purchases the product. This loss of social welfare is called deadweight loss. On the graph, deadweight loss is the area between the demand curve and the marginal cost curve between Q and M. This shows that monopoly leads to allocative inefficiency. With the rapid growth of artificial intelligence, companies and large data centers require massive quantities of advanced chips. This causes a large increase in demand for TSMC's products. So the demand curve shifts right. When the demand curve shifts right, the marginal revenue curve also shifts right. As a result, the new MR equals MC at a higher output level and higher price, which affects the TSMC to produce more chips, charge a higher monopoly price, and earns even greater profit. TSMC has extremely high fixed costs. These include building advanced semiconductor fabs, purchasing UV machines, maintaining clean room facilities, and a group of high-skilled engineering teams. These costs do not change with the level of output. As for the variable costs, such as silicon wafers, electricity and water, chemicals and gases, and great number of labor for production, these increases as production increases. Because fixed costs are very large and average costs fall as output rises, TSMC experiences strong economies of scale. This makes the advanced semiconductor industry very difficult for new firms to enter, and is a key reason why this market tends to be dominated by one or two major firms. Also, no other competitor has the professional engineering teams and their skills yet, making TSMC a monopoly of 2 to 3 nm chips. The next topic is profit visualization. The economic profit of TSMC can be clearly visualized on the graph as a rectangular area between the monopoly price line and the ATC curve, from 0 to the monopoly quantity M. In my graph, this area is highlighted to clearly show the size of the economic profit. Why can TSMC sustain positive long-run profit while other competitors struggle to match its efficiency and yield is because TSMC has some entry protection. They have some technology the customers are logged in, such as Apple and Nvidia, and they have the government trust and the geopolitical positions. At the same time, many competitors suffer from lower production yields and higher defect rates, which makes it difficult for them to match TSMC's efficiency and production quality. When TSMC builds new factories in places such as the United States, Japan, or Germany, this is a long-run production decision, because it will change the capital stock, factory scale, which we call the fixed costs. In the long run, all factors of production are variable, including capital, machines, and factory buildings. These large fixed investments will shift the ATC downward over time, expand production capacity, and strengthen global supply chain control, which helps the TSMC to reduce geopolitical risk, secure government subsidies, and lock in long-term contacts. Finally, we talk about what if Intel or Samsung catches up. If Intel or Samsung successfully achieve the same advanced technology level as TSMC, the market structure will change from a monopoly to an oligopoly. In an oligopoly, prices will become lower due to competition. Output will increase, profit margins will fall, innovation will accelerate. At the same time, deadweight loss will shrink and social welfare will improve. Major customers such as Apple and Nvidia will also gain more bargaining power. In our final conclusion in this topic, TSMC functions as a monopoly in advanced chip manufacturing because of extremely high fixed costs, strong economies of scale, and powerful technological barriers. By producing where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, it sets a high monopoly price, earns long-run economic profit, and creates stable loss. The rapid growth of artificial intelligence has further increased its demand and profit. However, future competition from Intel or Samsung could transform this monopoly into an oligopoly and reduce monopoly power. And that's the end of the topic 2.
Let us move into the last topic. It's the air pollution and negative externality, why the market fails and how to fix it. My name is San, and I'm going to be covering this part of the video presentation. So let us introduce the problem. So in the picture here, we can see a person wearing a mask. We can assume that the air is not very clean. And this is the first idea I want you to get in mind. It's that the clean air, is not free. When a factory produces a good, the smoke it releases imposes a cost. And this cost isn't imposed on the factory owner, it's imposed on you, on society. And this cost is also known as the negative externality, which is the unintended cost imposed on a third party by someone else's production or consumption. And in this example, we can see that negative externality comes from the producer, which is the power company that burns fuel, and towards the victim, which is anyone downwind, the local residents, the farmer, the wider public who suffers from higher healthcare costs, for example, the acid rain and reduced air quality. So, why negative externality leads to market failure? It's because the company only considers its marginal private cost, the cost of labor, fuel, and capital, and it further ignores the marginal external cost, which is the cost of their pollution. And why do we know that they ignored the marginal external cost? It's because this external cost isn't reflected in the price, and they in turn produce too much pollution, because we know that when price is low, the quantity becomes higher, which leads to market failure. And at the bottom here, we can see the equation, which is the fundamental idea in this topic, which is marginal social cost equals marginal private cost plus marginal external cost. Let us look at the graphical analysis. So I've drawn a negative production externality graph, and I will introduce each curve one by one. So first of all, we have the downward sloping demand curve, which represents the marginal social benefit. So now let us look at the graphical analysis. I've drawn a negative production externality graph here, and I'll be introducing all the curves one by one. So first of all, we have the downward sloping demand curve, which also represents the marginal social benefit. There's another curve that is a upward sloping supply curve, which here represents the marginal private cost. And when these two curves intersect, it shows us the market equilibrium, producing at quantity QE. Now we have to take into account cost of pollution. We have to add the external cost into the marginal private cost, which gets the marginal social cost, which is in red. This is the new supply curve that is socially optimum. So when this curve intersects with the demand curve, it shows the socially optimum quantity and price. We have to note that the market quantity is greater than the socially optimum quantity, which is typical negative externality. So without the government intervention to push the supply curve up to the social cost curve, the market will produce too much pollution without taking into account the external cost, the pollution. Okay, so notice that there is a difference. This difference represented by the dead weight loss. It's the loss of the social welfare. And this is the overproduction of polluting goods. And here it's shown when marginal social cost is greater than marginal social benefit. And this is the triangle that is highlighted here. Let us look at who gains from this unregulated market. who avoids paying the full price of their production and consumption. So first of all, it's the producer, the firm, because they reduce their private cost. The firm saves money by using the cheapest available methods for production and waste disposal. For example, dumping wastewater and releasing smoke without any cost. It's when marginal private cost is lower than marginal social cost. So they pay a relatively cheaper price for what they should pay, the price to society. So the consumer also gains because they pay a lower price. The consumer benefits from the firm's cost savings, which are partially passed on in the forms of lower market price for the goods they purchase. So they also benefit from the firm's cheaper price. So who loses? Who bears the external cost? It's the third-party public, the society, because they bear the health and medical cost, the environmental degradation, the reduced quality of life. So let us look at how the government could correct this failure, this market failure. There are two options they can choose from. First is the regulation, the command and control system. The second is the market-based solution, the Pigovian tax way, by internalizing the externality. So let us first look at the command and control, where the government regulate behavior by directly requiring or forbidding certain behavior by implementing strict rules, strict laws. So I have 4 examples here. First, the emission standards, where they set legally forcible limits on the quantity or rate of pollution that a source is allowed to release into the environment. The other one is technology standards, where they mandate the use of specific technologies or equipments that polluters must install to control or prevent pollution. The third one is the ambient standards, that they set targets that apply to the overall quality of the environment in a specific geographical location. And the other one is the ban and prohibition, to completely forbid certain harmful activities and substances or processes. For example, when people used to use CFC in refrigerators or any kind of spray, this led to the hole in the ozone layer, and then the government realized this is not good for the environment. They prohibit the use of CFC completely, and this is one example of command and control. So let us look at the pros and the cons. So one of the advantages includes simplicity and directness. We know that the command and control imposes a strict law. The company either complies or they don't. So it's very straightforward. The other is the high certainty of outcome, because the command and control, they can impose a specific emission limits or on technology. So this allowed them to have a higher assurance of whether a specific environmental goal is met or not. And further, it allows the perceived fairness by the public, because they impose the same standards on all the regulated entities. And further, historical effectiveness, because in history it is proven that there are a lot of cases that has been very successful, especially in the early stage of protection in the environment. In the cons, we have the lack of incentive for innovation, because once a firm meets the required standard, there is zero incentive to reduce pollution further or to innovate beyond the mandated technology. Furthermore, the command and control could possibly create an inflexible situation where they result in a one-size-fits-all approach, because they don't allow the firms to find the most cost-effective way to reduce pollution, and it often leads to a higher cost to society. And since different firms has different ways of dealing with their cost. Furthermore, it requires high information cost, because the regulator needs a detailed information on what to set the standard, a more efficient standard. So it takes time to grab these information. And lastly, it leads to the political compromise, because
these standards are still set through a political and legislative process. They have to go through this bureaucratic, long process as well. Okay, so let's move on to the other solution, which is the Pigovian tax solution. This involves internalizing the externality. So by taxing the pollution, the government turns the external cost into the private cost. So this forces the producer to pay the price of the pollution. And what should the tax rate be? It should be the marginal external cost in order to, let the marginal private cost curve align with the marginal social cost curve, because the marginal social cost curve equals the marginal private cost plus the tax. And this will result in the market equilibrium equals social optimum, and the market will naturally move to the efficient quantity. So here are a few pros and cons. So some advantages includes it brings market efficiency. It is an incentive for innovation. It also discourages harmful activities, and most importantly, it generates revenue for the government. So a few cons are it is hard to measure with the optimum tax rate what is the exact external cost, and also the political issue that is the same as the other solution we just saw. Now, let us introduce a real-world policy example, the European Union Emission Trading System, EU ETS. This system uses cap and trade system instead of direct tax. The EU sets a cap on total pollution and issues tradable permits. This creates a market price for carbon, achieving the same results as the Pigovian tax. So its effectiveness. The EU ETS significantly reduces emission down to 50% from 2005 levels. It also encourages fuel switching and adoption of low-carbon technology. It also helped with the market-based incentives. So the main challenges include setting the price. The initial price of the permits was sometimes too low to incentivize change. The political resistance. Industries lobby against the system, arguing it reduces competitiveness. So far, we have treated air pollution as a localized problem, but the air and the pollution in it doesn't respect political borders. This brings us to the international externality problem. It's when, for example, country A's factory emissions drift to nearby countries, and country B is suffering a negative externality from the acid rain, haze, or health problems caused by pollution from country A. And now country A's government and producers ignore the cost on their neighbors, the cost they impose on country B. And this is a market failure, because in the absence of a global system, a country has no economic incentive to reduce its pollution to the socially optimal level for global community. They enjoy the private benefit of cheap production, while the external cost is borne by another sovereign nation. Now let us look at this question. Can international cooperation serve as a Pigovian mechanism? We have two examples. First is the climate agreement. For example, the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol. So this attempt to create a global social contract where participating nations agree to certain rules, caps, or targets. And the other is the carbon market. For example, the European Union's emission trading system we just mentioned earlier, whereby they link with other national or regional markets, forming a massive international cap and trade system, which is a market-based policy that sets a price on carbon. And their aims are to shift the globe's collective production down from the inefficient global market quantity, producing a similar result to the Pigovian mechanism. Therefore, the international cooperation can function as a Pigovian mechanism, forcing countries to internalize the global external cost of carbon emissions by attaching a verifiable monetary value to them. So that's it. Thank you so much for your time.